scheduled. Oh, there we go. Now it's live. Hello, everybody. So we have on the show today the lovely Dr. Lindsay Irwin, who we spoke about on Wednesday. So she's a naturopath in Calgary at Mardeloop Wellness. Is that what it's called?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I should know that. I just go to it and I don't even think about it. So, so we've been talking a lot about different stress patterns and whatnot. And we had a bunch of questions about people. I'm so sounding Canadian right now. My aboutness is getting more Canadian every time I talk. But they were talking about nutrition and ways that they could help themselves during this stressful period and trying to boost their immunity and everything else. So that's why we wanted to have you on right now. So we're going to get into that. Dr. Major, did you want to say anything before we get Lindsay rolling here?
No, I'm actually really looking forward to and excited what Lindsay has to say. So this has been an area of interest for me for a long time too. And I even got my pen and paper ready.
You're such a nerd.
It's true.
But we love you for it. So Lindsay, do you have any overarching suggestions right now for people? Let's start with the stress part of it more than just the immune system part of it.
Yeah, well, those two are hard to separate because stress is so impactful on the immune system. And that's what I'm seeing a lot right now is everyone's under quite a bit of stress. And so they're actually manifesting a lot of symptoms and feeling unwell because of all this stress on top of everything else.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a huge area. And I think I'd be remiss not to speak about really basic things to start. Sleep is crucial for stress and also for the immune system. We just really can't get anywhere if we're not sleeping properly.
And why is that? How does that affect our body aside from it makes us feel like we're feeling better?
Sleep basically resets everything. So not only does it affect all of our hormones, our hormones also include things like adrenaline and cortisol and all that kind of thing. So if we're not sleeping, we're not regenerating and we're not healing, which is a huge issue and a huge obstacle for our body fighting something and also being able to be resilient as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's a big one.
Last time we were on, we were talking about serotonin and cortisol and all that kind of stuff. So how does sleep specifically affect those pathways for us?
Well, it gets a little bit more complicated. I mean, when it comes down to things like cortisol and growth hormone and the interplay between all of those, we need to be sleeping. There's just no other mechanism to kind of to reset and to reboot that. Serotonin's a little bit different. I mean, there is some resetting that happens, but that gets a bit more into nutrition and what we have in our body in order to make those neurotransmitters.
Right.
But it's all connected. Yeah. I'll also mention things like exercise. That's really important. And diet. I mean, we can talk about some of the nutrients, and I think that would be an important thing to discuss in a few minutes. But I also think just basic dietary things are really, really important. Making sure you're getting, all your antioxidants, getting enough fiber to help your microbiome, which is an important piece for your immune system as well. Those are things that everyone should be working on. And staying away from sugar. We don't like to hear that. Maybe as dentists, you do like to hear that.
Yes. Eat more sugar.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely pretty much paralyzes the immune system for a while if you're getting a lot of processed sugar. So I'm fine with fruit, like whole foods, go for it. But when it comes to processed sugars, processed foods in general, we're not doing ourselves anything good by eating those. Yeah.
And Michael, yesterday you were saying, when you look at the grocery store, if you've been to it recently, the stuff that is left there is all the healthy stuff. And then the highly processed stuff is what has been cleared off the shelves.
Yeah, that's what I've been seeing for sure. Have you noticed that as well in the grocery store, Lindsay?
Yeah, it's been interesting actually for me because there's beautiful produce right now in Calgary, like beautiful red peppers, the broccoli, and it's just sitting there, which is shocking to me. I mean, all these fruits and veggies have so many interesting compounds. I mean, one of the ones that's been talked about specifically with the situation going on now is quercetin, if you've looked at any of the research on that. And it's a powerful antioxidant, and it's really easy to get from fruits and vegetables. So if we would eat more of that, we could really be helping ourselves and helping our lungs. But I think in some of the buying that's been going on, people are looking for food that's going to last a long time and some of the fear. And I get that. But I think the opportunity, especially in Calgary right now, is there's a lot of really good fresh food out there, and we need to eat more of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. Like, people are stockpiling the stuff that's going to last forever. But in my head, I'm like, we're not going to be able to get the fresh stuff forever, right?
Totally.
It's eventually going to run out, because if we have a shutdown of the borders and everything else, we're going to have a major problem on our hands.
Totally. Yeah. And it's huge. Our diet's huge. I think most of us know if we're eating poorly, we don't feel well. Like, it seems very obvious, but we can really do a lot for our immune system by eating more fresh fruit and veggies and unprocessed food in general.
So do you have some tips and tricks and like specific things we could be working on for the kinds of foods that would be boosting our immunity right now? I mean, I know you talked about sleep, and that's really my jam too, but the food part of it, because like you said, so many of the nutrients that we need that allow our body the building blocks to go in the directions that are going to serve us.
Yes.
What are some really simple things you can suggest that would boost immunity and overall health and decrease inflammation and manage stress?
Yeah, and I'll kind of say the same thing. It's actually pretty simple. I really do think right now it's fruit and vegetables, especially dark green leafy vegetables like broccoli and Swiss chard, and there's some beautiful Brussels sprouts out right now, asparagus, all those things. And so I know for some people it's hard to, I guess, cook with vegetables, but literally just baking them. Like, you can literally cut up broccoli or asparagus, like throw it in the oven for like 10-15 minutes with some olive oil or coconut oil or whatever you're using for that. Throw some lemon on it, even just like sea salt, like really basic, and it's so tasty and really nutrient dense. Smoothies, some people like. It's still a little cold here, so I don't love a lot of cold foods. But if smoothies are easy for people, you can put in some berries like blueberries, raspberries, throw in spinach. Literally that simple to up your greens and up your veggies and fruit in a really simple way. Yeah.
A question about like what happens if we run out of the fresh food. Like, so if we're going to have to rely on supplements, is there stuff that we can kind of be building up in our system right now that will help us when we get to that phase if we do have the fresh food kind of run out?
Yes. Yeah. And so there's a few basic things that I think are really important. I mean, vitamin D is something that most people know about, but we need to talk about it. Vitamin D is so important for the immune system. It's a really big antiviral, which a lot of people don't know. They think vitamin D, bone health. Yes, that's important, but vitamin D does so much more in the body than just that. So making sure you know what your vitamin D level is, because in Alberta specifically, most people are low. Even people that are taking vitamin D are low. And so we want to make sure that in Alberta specifically, that we're kind of sitting in the middle to the high end of that range for vitamin D. So I think it's good to get a baseline done. For now, because that may be a bit of a challenge, I think it's best just to be on vitamin D for everyone at this point. And I'm recommending around 4,000 IUs for the average person. That may be underdoing it for some people, and it may be overdoing it, but vitamin D can be an issue at high doses, but 4,000 IUs a day for the next 2 months is not going to cause an issue. And it's really, really important. So vitamin D is huge. Vitamin C, again, very simple supplement that we've known about for a long time, but there's some really interesting research coming out of China right now around vitamin C. I don't know if you've heard that they were doing even IV vitamin C in China.
Okay.
And what's been really interesting to see is that data has actually been used, and they've started to use it in the States, which is really interesting, because that was something that I didn't think we'd see getting adopted into more mainstream medicine. But so, I mean, obviously IVs are harder to access for most people.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere we can go to get that done right now? Probably not, right?
Well, the challenge is that really no one else is supposed to be treating coronavirus, right? Like, we're not supposed to be treating that. And so it is a bit of a challenge to do that. So we'll see if it goes more mainstream and see what happens. But what people can do is you can literally just take vitamin C, and we've seen the studies on what happens, like the pharmacokinetics and things around vitamin C orally versus IV. And it's actually not bad. So if you can get a hold of vitamin C, what you want to do is you want to be taking it in divided doses. Because the problem with vitamin C versus vitamin D, for instance, is with vitamin C, it's water soluble. So if you take a massive dose, it won't hurt, but you're going to pee a lot of it out. So you're kind of wasting your money on that. It's better to take vitamin C in lower doses more frequently. And what it's looking like is if you can aim to get around 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C a day. That's really, really helpful, and it's going to keep your levels up a little bit higher.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is what we want to be getting from food, these antioxidants and these nutrients. But if we're in a situation where we can't access that, vitamin C is really, really helpful. So if you have a vitamin C, a pill that's 500 milligrams, like take that every few hours. If it's 1,000 milligrams, same thing, take it every few hours. I wouldn't do more than about 1,000 milligrams at a time. Again, it won't be harmful, but it's kind of a waste of that vitamin C at that point.
Right.
Yeah, so getting to higher doses of that would be very, very helpful right now. And then the other one that's really important, and again, is one that we always talk about every fall, in my practice anyway, is zinc. So zinc is a really effective antiviral, again, specifically with what we're dealing with right now. It's super important.
Huge.
Yeah, and a lot of people are deficient in zinc, and we've been finding this for years, because even if you're trying to get good quality food, if there's no zinc left in the soil, well, you're not eating any zinc. It doesn't come from the air. So a lot of people are deficient in zinc. And so it's one I recommend most people try to get on a little bit every year. But for now, again, for the next few months, at least 30 milligrams a day, which is a little bit of a higher dose. But the research is actually saying more like 50 to 60 milligrams a day if you can get your hands on it, because zinc has kind of disappeared from the shelves lately. It was bought up right away because of some of the research around this virus specifically. But if you can get on zinc, make sure you take it with food at that dose. You won't feel very good if you take it on an empty stomach.
Yep.
So take it with food, but really try to get on some zinc, especially for the next few months. The vitamin C, the vitamin D, and the zinc, being on those consistently for the next 2 months, I think will make a difference for people, and it's very safe and really inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can get, go way down the rabbit hole with different treatments that we can use. But those are kind of the basics that I think everyone should be doing. Yeah.
While we're on the topic with vitamin D and some of these major players, there's some conversation about your body's ability to absorb vitamin D.
Yeah.
And there's some challenges there. Can you speak a little bit to that? How we can incorporate this into our diet to maximize our absorption of vitamin D?
Yeah, vitamin D needs to be taken with fat because it is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you get the cheap form of vitamin D, those little white pills that you often see sold, if you take that with a glass of water, chances are you're not absorbing it. So try to get your vitamin D either in an oil form, like a liquid, or one of the gel caps that has an oil. And it is good to take vitamin D with food because you're right, otherwise your body just won't absorb it. But if you are taking, people should be getting a bit of fat with every meal anyway, so it shouldn't be a big deal. But if you can try to get a form that is in a bit of oil already, that may help with the absorption. Yeah.
So make sure that you're incorporating some sort of fat in your meal, whether it's like a dairy or a plant-based fat, something that's going to be good for your body anyway.
Avocado.
Along with the vitamin D. Yeah. Avocado. Yeah. Go crazy with the avocado. We got all this fresh produce right now.
So good.
Stock up on avocado with your thing.
Totally. Yeah.
Now, can I ask one question? With different companies, like there's good quality vitamins out there and there's ones that are not great. Is there a way for people to discern without being like this brand versus that brand and whatnot?
Yeah, well, that gets interesting. Vitamin D's in Canada, D3 is pretty much D3. You can't really go wrong, which is good. The only thing I would say is just watch what form they're putting it in as far as like oil or just the white powdered tablet form.
Okay.
But the chemical D3 is all they're allowed to sell now in Canada. That wasn't always the case, so it was more of an issue. At this point, if you can get D3, I would just take it. Same with vitamin C. Again, we can go down the rabbit hole about where they're sourcing the vitamin C. Is it coming from China? Is it being made from genetically modified corn? These are some controversial topics. It is nice to know where you're sourcing it from. And so, I have a few companies that I think do a better job. Honestly, at this point, if you can get yourself some vitamin C, I would just get some vitamin C. But moving forward, if you are utilizing some of the more reputable companies, which that can be a hard thing to discern as a consumer because every company thinks they're the best, of course. I would just watch some of the really cheap. I don't really want to be like touting certain companies right now, but I would just watch out for some of the cheaper manufacturers because for sure they're getting their product from China. Mm-hmm. But at this point, I would say if you can get vitamin C, get it. Zinc in general tends to be pretty safe. You know me, I'm pretty picky with supplements. So for me to say this, it's usually I'm saying I want you to take this from this company in this form. With these,
that's why I love you. You're very specific in what you want us to take. So
yeah, vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin D are a little bit exceptions. I'm pretty open with what you're going to get in Canada. It's pretty decent. I mean, there's so many different forms of zinc: picolinate, citrate, glycinate. I mean, there's a whole bunch. At this point, I would say whatever you can get your hands on is good. Yeah, just because that's where we're at right now. Yeah.
There's someone asking in the audience about cold effects, if you have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, some people swear by it. I don't use it a lot in my practice. I do love herbs though, and that is sourced, it's basically part of a herb they've kind of taken out and made. I don't think it's going to hurt anything. There's no evidence that that would be causing any problems, and it is supportive for the immune system. So if that's what you have at home, I don't think that would be a bad idea. Yeah.
And zinc lozenges, is that
great.
a good thing too?
If you can get a hold of them, they're great. Most zinc lozenges max out around 10 or 15 milligrams, which is fine. So if you have some, you could take a few of those a day. But yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any recommendations for doses of all these different things for kids versus adults? I assume that the dosages that you're saying for us were more for adult type doses.
Yeah, those are adult doses. In general with kids, so it just kind of depends on their body weight more than anything. Again, to be honest, these are all really safe in the short term. These aren't some things we recommend, but be very careful with what we're suggesting. Vitamin D, just as a general statement, to say kids to go on 2,000 IUs a day is not going to cause any problems in the short term. So I would say that. Vitamin C, honestly, I mean, my 6-year-old's taking about 4,000 milligrams a day right now, and he tolerates that just fine. So with vitamin C, what will happen if you get to high doses is you'll reach what's called bowel tolerance. Have you heard of this with vitamin C? So what will happen is eventually you'll start getting loose stools. It's not dangerous. It's just an osmotic thing. Your body's just pulling more water. That's kind of that's when we know you've kind of reached what your body needs. So we say get to bowel tolerance and then back off. For some adults, that could be between 4,000 to 10,000 milligrams or more.
Wow.
What they found with a lot of viruses, including this one, is when you do get sick, your body's need goes up. So people that were taking 5,000 can go up to 15,000, and it will not cause any bowel issues. The idea is that the body's utilizing it. So you do want to be flexible with your use. So what I suggest for my patients is we try to see where bowel tolerance is, take them down from that. And then if they're sick, we just say, take more, just keep taking it. Zinc, same thing. I would do kind of, the zinc lozenges are great for kids because they are already at a bit of a lower dose and they're easier for kids to take.
Yeah.
So again, aiming for 10, 15 milligrams a day for kids right now. Again, this isn't really meant to be long-term with zinc. We have to start wondering about other minerals long-term. But for the next month or two, we don't need to worry about this. It'd just be better to get it in the body. Yeah.
When you think about some of these other like vitamins and natural sources, roughly, if you're talking the dosage that you're looking for vitamin C, how many oranges a day would that be? Because we always think of citrus and vitamin C.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you look at the amount of vitamin C actually in an orange. It's actually disappointing if you've ever looked at it.
No, I haven't. That's why I'm asking.
It's really, really low. I mean, I think it's something like 60 milligrams. Don't quote me on this.
Okay.
But you have to realize, though, a whole food is always a better source because it's not just about ascorbic acid. We know in oranges, I think it's something like 200 or 300 different nutrients they found in it. So you're going to get hesperidin and quercetin, all these bioflavonoids, all these other compounds that allow it to work better in the body. And that's why, I mean, I love if you can get supplements that are even sourced from whole foods. It just works better in the body, and some of these other like camu you may have heard about, and some of these other kind of natural sources of vitamin C. I mean, I think science is great, but I think that, from food, what we get, there's so much there that we don't even understand. So we can't quite make that comparison. I think it's always good to be eating like high vitamin C rich foods. So yeah, things like oranges, kiwis, most fruit, to be honest, is a really good idea.
Even if it's frozen, like a lot of people are going to be stockpiling stuff that's going to last longer because they don't want it expiring, right?
Frozen food is actually great. They've done studies on how much of the nutrient content is maintained, and it's actually really impressive. So there's no issue with frozen vegetables or fruit. If that's what you have, that's perfect. Yep, it's good. Yeah.
What about B vitamins?
Yeah, B vitamins, as you know, I love B vitamins. I think it's the same kind of thing. Most people are a bit deficient because we're just not getting enough from our food. And then the other challenge with B vitamins is by the time we, like, again, for us up here in the north, it's by the time we get a lot of our food, it may have been picked when it wasn't ripe. It may have had a lot of other oxidative stress. By the time we cook it and use it, it's lost a lot of its antioxidants, including some of the B vitamins that are in that. And then stress depletes B vitamins out of the body. Like when you're talking about things like serotonin and cortisol, these are all cofactors that we need to build these things. So people under a lot of stress right now, it's going to be challenging to get enough B vitamins, which we need for our hormones and our liver and our adrenal and so many different things. So I do like B vitamins, not specifically for the immune system, but again, everything's connected. So it's not a bad idea to do that. So B vitamins are a little more complicated though, because there's a lot of stuff out there that's not great as far as the forms of the B vitamins. So again, I would look for companies that are using more of the active ingredients for B vitamins. So with B12, trying to avoid cyanocobalamin, I'm looking more for methyl or hydroxycobalamin. Same with folate. Folic acid as a synthetic vitamin isn't great for a lot of people. So we want to look for the active form of folate, which companies will pretty proudly put on their label if they're doing that, because they know they're putting in a little bit of a pricier product. So usually you'll see if there's the active form there, because they'll tell you the form.
Okay.
So it's not a bad idea to do some B vitamins as well.
There's a question from the audience here. What foods are high in zinc if we're trying to get it naturally?
Yeah, so some of the nuts like pumpkin seeds and things like that, oysters, I'm not sure where we get a lot of oysters. Yeah. so that's a really good source. But a lot of the nuts and seeds is where we find a lot of that from. So that's a really good place. We get a lot of interesting nutrients from nuts and seeds. So things like Brazil nuts have a lot of selenium. That's one of the best places to get that from. And selenium is also important for the immune system. So this kind of goes back though to this whole food idea, having a good variety of whole foods. If you do that, you're going to get a lot of these nutrients naturally.
Yeah.
And again, the doses may not look as impressive as getting it on a supplement, but there's so much more benefit from getting it from food. The body recognizes it, which we can't always guarantee with supplements. I mean, that's a huge issue. Just because it's made in a factory somewhere and it says on the bottle, this is zinc. Does the body even know it's zinc? It's a hard one to know.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can get, especially raw nuts and seeds, and get some of those in, it's really, they're yummy. It's easy to get. There's lots in the store still. I see them.
If you stay on the outside of the store, you can get lots of food. If you go to the middle aisles, that's where you're
totally
you're having a deficiency.
Definitely.
Yeah. So last time we talked about the Dirty Genes book, which I think is an interesting thing for you to talk about, because you're the one who introduced me to it. And when people have their bodies going into disease states, which we could start to see happening because people are not eating properly, they're not getting the right exercise. What do they need to be looking out for to try and figure out if something is not quite right with their body right now?
Yeah. So genetics is really interesting. I know we have talked about this. I think what I'll choose to speak about right now is more like the epigenetic piece, because unless you've had your genetics looked at, I mean, it's hard to say. Some people really need extra nutrients. It's like they really need extra B12 or vitamin D or all these other things. It's such a personal thing. I mean, this is kind of like the ultimate of individualized medicine. So in general, what I say for people is if we don't know those things, look about more around the epigenetics, which just means like all the environmental factors that actually probably play a much bigger role than our genes do. And I've probably said this to you, but, in environmental medicine, what we say is, the genes point the gun, but the environment pulls the trigger.
Right.
And so if you can work on the environmental pieces, and again, I know they sound kind of boring and not exciting, but sleep and diet and stress levels and good whole food, you will save yourself. You'll do your body a really good thing. We can get very, very nitpicky with supplements. And IVs and different nutritional plans. And I think that can be really helpful, especially when we're trying to pull someone out of like a chronic state. But for the average person, if you're just trying to help yourself, we're looking at the environment. And so that also goes into what are you using on your body? What are you putting in your body? The air you're breathing, the water you're drinking. I mean, we go way down the rabbit hole there, but everything our body has to deal with. So it's important to look around and actually see what you're using and what's around you. That's what I would say about that. Like I said, it's hard to make general statements around genetics.
For sure.
But I think we do know enough to know that epigenetics are really probably more important than the details.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I got a geeky question I'd like to have your thoughts on. Because I'm the geek and I've already been called the geek, so I may as well live up to this.
Perfect.
Yeah. Sorry, friend.
I'm sure you've heard about this a little bit. I'm kind of curious your comments on the use of therapeutic high dose vitamin D, like 50,000 units once a week.
Yes.
And the evidence that surrounds it, especially more so out of Europe than in North America.
Uh-oh. Is he frozen for you?
And how to do it
He's
safely.
Frozen. Michael, you froze.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, man.
Whenever you're saying something like really important, that's like, when you freeze. Like every broadcast.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know where I got cut off. Do you want me to start it over again here?
Yeah, just start again.
Okay. So I wanted to know about the use of high dose vitamin D, like the 50,000 units once a week as a therapeutic dose. I know it's a bigger thing in Europe than is in North America, but in terms of, are there things we should be thinking about using it safely? Are there concerns? I'm really curious to hear your point of view.
Yeah, so because it's fat soluble, it's totally fine to do that. And for a lot of my patients, because it can be hard to take supplements every day, especially if they're in liquid form. And this is what I do, honestly, is I have a liquid vitamin D, and once a week, I just kind of take a bigger dose of it.
A big swig.
Exactly. Just for the ease, because it's not one that I put in my little pill container, if that makes sense. So it's just easier to do. That's totally fine. And actually, specifically for viruses, we will mega dose. And the reason why I didn't really talk a lot about that is you want to be a little bit careful. You don't want people just going out and taking 30,000 IUs a day, because they could eventually get toxic. Yep. But in situations like this, especially if you think you have caught a virus, we will do mega doses, actually of both vitamin A and vitamin D for the short term. And there is some really interesting evidence, and that can be a really good way to bring up your vitamin D, which is why I think it's important to know what your baseline vitamin D is. Because if your vitamin D is sitting around 30, I mean, I would definitely recommend mega dosing right now to bring you up. So taking 50,000 IUs is fine. It's just, we need to kind of put that into context. But there's definitely some evidence that when people are sick, it might be a really good idea to do mega dosing for a few weeks to help their body. Yeah.
And part of my reason too that I looked into this in the past, just in the kind of areas and arenas I've worked, is also being used as a therapeutic dose for mental health.
Yes. Yeah.
And is there some specific pathways that goes more towards the mental health sides of things, or is this more being looped around still through the immune system? And when you're over at healthier immunity, then you have a healthier mental state as well.
Well, that's true. But vitamin D, I mean, the research is amazing as far as like, it really probably shouldn't be called a vitamin. It's almost more hormone-like in the body. It affects inflammation. And as I'm sure you guys know, inflammation affects everything.
Everything.
Vitamin D hugely affects gut health.
Yeah.
And so as soon as the gut's being affected, we see mood. And, vitamin D has been talked about with mood for a long time, with especially seasonal affective disorder, low rates of vitamin D, especially in the northern latitudes. So there's a lot of links there. So there's a lot of research that links it to a lot of things. It's kind of everything, which is why I think it's so important and why I do make it a priority as far as like getting that baseline tested. And if someone's struggling, I've seen some pretty impressive things with mega dosing vitamin D, like it turning around some pretty heavy mood states pretty quickly. It's hard to say exactly why, if it's an inflammatory response, if it's a gut response. Sometimes we don't really know, but as long as we know where someone's sitting with their vitamin D, if we know we need to bring them up, it's usually always beneficial. Even pain. I've had people in a lot of pain where vitamin D, that's all we've done, and that's taken them out of some pain states. So it works in a lot of different areas.
You mentioned a little bit about vitamin A, but you haven't really gone into much of it up to this point. Would you mind unpacking that one a little bit more in some of the, both supplements or diet, but to explain a little bit more about how that works with the body?
Yeah, so vitamin A, it kind of falls in the category with vitamin D being a fat-soluble vitamin. It's an excellent antiviral. So in naturopathic medicine, we'll often use high-dose vitamin A in viral situations, especially with kids. You may have heard the research on like vitamin A and measles. Have you heard about this?
How no, I haven't.
Yeah, especially in refugee camps and places like that. A lot of the negative sequelae that can come out of things like measles can be remedied by upping people's vitamin A. Because if you have low vitamin A, very similarly to vitamin D, you're more prone to viruses and the consequences of those viruses. So vitamin A isn't one that we test as frequently, but it's a good idea. in general, again, this you can get through having a good diet. There is a difference between beta carotene in the plant world converting to like the palmitate form, which is more like the animal world, if that makes sense. So generally what I'm talking about right now for viruses is you actually want the palmitate form. The beta carotene form, there's not as much evidence around that for viruses. So if you can go and just get a vitamin A, and most of the ones in the store, they'll actually, if it says vitamin A on it, it is a palmitate. If it says beta carotene, it's the beta carotene form.
Okay.
So, so yeah, you can do pretty high doses. We'll do like 100,000 IU doses. Like we go pretty high with that. So that's an option too.
And what kind of daily doses then do you suggest?
You know, it's not something that I get people to go on every day, just kind of prevention. If someone is really prone to viruses, or if it is like a high viral time, especially in kids, we'll sometimes do that. But that's one that we more kind of use as the time arises, which is now. I think now it wouldn't be a bad idea to take a little bit of vitamin A. We do use it for other like viral outbreaks. So someone's having like a herpes outbreak or like shingles, like things like that, where it's a little bit more acute. We'll use that because that can be helpful. Is one you have to be a little careful with though, because you do store that, so it can be a little toxic. So we don't hand that one out as freely as vitamin D. So
can you explain the gut biome link? Because I think a lot of people aren't realizing how much that affects everything else in our body. We think, yeah,
that's a whole topic of conversation.
We can bring you back again.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, microbiome. I mean, it's such an interesting topic because it's been researched so heavily in the last 10 years. You know, from a naturopathic perspective, we've always been obsessed with digestion because we know how important that is. I mean, because our gut is not just where we absorb all of our nutrients, although that by itself is hugely important. The gut holds our immune system, the vast majority of our immune system. And so if there's an issue there, inflammation, you're literally going to have an issue there. And same with mood. We know there's such a huge link. There's more serotonin in the gut than in the brain, which is wild. And so we see that. We see that even being used in Western medicine. They're using antidepressants for IBS, and it can work really well sometimes, which kind of opens up a whole can of worms if you think about it. So yeah, working on a healthy microbiome is always a good idea. And again, your diet plays a huge role. So making sure you're getting enough fiber. If you're not getting enough fiber, then you're not going to be able to maintain and support a healthy microbiome. So that's where those fruit and vegetables come in. So they're so important for that. Definitely fermented foods. And we can go, again, there's a lot of different ways we can go. Probiotics is an interesting one. The research it's interesting. We'll see where that kind of all falls.
Why is it interesting?
Well, because, you know, for a while there, it was kind of like probiotics could save the world. That was my feeling anyway. It was like probiotics were the be all end all. And we definitely know, you know, with my patients, like anytime someone goes on an antibiotic, I definitely recommend going on a probiotic. And that's to avoid some of the other things like C. difficile that we're seeing more frequently, yeast infections, problems like that. I still think probiotics are a good idea. Whether there's something you need to take every day is a little bit controversial. Not that it's going to hurt you, but is that something that you actually need? Like, what is that actually doing for people long term? Some people feel a lot better, so I say go for it. I think, again, we need to look at lifestyle and staying away from, you know, too much alcohol, medications that hurt the gut, foods that hurt the gut, and really focusing on building up it like from the food level. And again, fiber is huge. Fiber is what feeds a lot of these diverse microbiome that we have. So if you're not eating well, you can kind of take all the probiotics you want, and I don't think it's going to make as much of a difference as we'd like it to make. And it's just linked to everything in the body. Yeah.
I'm thinking we need Lindsay back at some point for a gut talk, because I could ask you all kinds of questions about aerobic, anaerobic, and sulfur contents and alkaline water. But
yeah, there's so much information out there, and it's really very interesting.
There was something you said before the probiotics part of it. It was like there's 3 things that you said. I had a question about that. Michael, do you have it in your notes?
Don't. So I'm not so good at mind reading yet. I'm working on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think the big takeaway, again, if we're just going to have more general conversation about the gut, is around getting a good diversity of food. Like I said, fiber is it's huge, the fiber that we get from fruit and vegetables. We know that makes a difference. That's something we can say definitively is going to help, and it'll help so many other areas. And we need to eat, so why not eat good food? Whereas, taking probiotics, it doesn't, I haven't seen that hurt anyone. But when we look at some of the studies, sometimes it's questionable how long that's lasting in the gut. And I think there's other things that are going on there, which can be really, really helpful. So like I said, I am a big fan of probiotics. I just think, again, we don't want to get too reliant on a pill as being our savior. We really want to look at the bigger picture. Yeah. So that's what I'd say about that.
Yeah. I think that's all great advice. So, Michael, do you have any more questions before we head out?
No, I'm actually picked up some great tips and tricks. And like I said, I've been studying this for a long time, so I appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a lot more around the viruses, like getting into herbs and stuff like that. But like I said, that might be a topic for another day. But I think the basics for people is huge. And I think people downplay that sometimes because it seems like, oh, we know that, but you should be doing it.
Yes.
Because it will make a difference. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so true. Awesome. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. When we step off the broadcast, I just want to ask you a few questions about potentially bringing you back. So thank you for sharing your time today and giving some really great information for everyone, because we had a ton of questions about this last time. So this is really helpful to unpack a lot of these concepts.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Well, everyone have a great day. Happy Friday. And we'll see you again on Monday, 1:00.